The Genos are finished. That's the only way to say it cleanly. 3 years of network, cells across 6 continents, sleeper demigods in every major city, cursed ones embedded in Zeta Prime academies from Nabi to Orlo, gone in 11 days. 11 days. And the gods didn't even do it themselves. They sent the heroes. Of course they did. You have to understand what that means. The heroes are demigods just like us. Same divine blood, same Zeta Prime training, same hunger. The only difference is they said yes when Olympus called. They took the mission board, they took the divine blessing, they took the title, and they pointed themselves at anyone who refused. Pointed themselves at us. And they won. So now here we are. Assimilation. That's the word Karen used when he read the terms. Assimilation. Like we were a culture being peacefully absorbed. Like the ones who didn't survive the 11 days would appreciate the framing. Karen and the Hecutans standing in front of what remained of the Genos network, 43 people out of hundreds, and using the word assimilation with a straight face. My name is Medusa. I'm 25 years old. I have serpents where my hair used to be, I have a gaze that turns things to stone when the curse flares, and I have a list. The list has 2 names on it. Poseidon, Athena. Everything else, the assimilation, the heroes, Karen with his ferryman's patience and his quiet cruelty, the Hecudan watching us from every corner with their 100 hands folded and their 50 heads tracking our movements. All of that is just the distance between me and those 2 names. That's it. That's my entire relationship with the current situation. I'll explain everything from the beginning. Zeta Prime is what they call the network of academies that teach magic. Every country has at least 1 campus. You learn your affinities at 11, you specialize at 14, you graduate at 18 if you're standard and 17 if you're gifted and 16 if you're something else entirely. The curriculum covers elemental channeling, ward construction, summoning theory, divine communication, all the polished useful things that make a functioning magical society run. You learn to write runes in cursive before you learn to shave. Magic is the baseline. It's water. It's air. It's just the texture of the world. What Zeta Prime does not teach you is that the gods are not benevolent administrators of that world. What it does not teach you is that the divine authority filtering down through blessing and curse and hero missions is a leash system. What it does not teach you is that when a god decides they want something from a mortal, a service, a silence, a body, there is no classroom procedure for that. No ward you can raise. No rune that holds. I learned that at 19. I was a Zeta Prime senior. Top 3 in my graduating cohort for ward construction. I had gotten a commendation from the Athena faculty. That's how the academies work. Each major god has a faculty association. You can apply for divine mentorship if your scores qualify. I had qualified. I was proud of that. I want you to understand I was genuinely proud. I thought it meant something. It meant I was visible. Poseidon noticed me at the spring convocation. I don't want to spend too long on what happened next because the words are not the point. The point is what came after. The point is Athena, who I had trusted, who I had worked to impress, who I had believed would, I don't know. Intervene. Correct it. Acknowledge it. Athena, who instead decided that the appropriate response was a curse. Because I had been in her temple. Because the sanctity of her space was the thing that needed addressing. Not the god who violated her worshipper in it. The space. The sanctity. That's when the snakes came. That's when I understood that the gods were not what Zeta Prime's curriculum said they were. And that's when Prometheus found me. I don't know exactly how he found me. He always said he'd been watching the Athena faculty victim list for years, and I was just the latest name. Said it like it was a joke. Prometheus could make anything sound like a joke. That was the first thing I noticed about him, that he could sit in a planning room surrounded by cursed demigods with nowhere else to go and make it feel like a faculty lounge. Warm. Almost normal. He and Hercules built the Genos together. That's the thing about Hercules that people outside our network never understood. Before Olympus bought him, before the deification, he was one of the sharpest strategic minds in the mortal world. He knew exactly how divine power worked because he'd been weaponized by it his entire life. 12 labors is 12 case studies in how gods use demigods as instruments. He'd analyzed every one. He and Prometheus between them had mapped the architecture of divine authority, where the power came from, how it moved through the system, what the structural weaknesses were, and most importantly, how a demigod could accumulate enough personal power to threaten something that was technically supposed to be unkillable. That's the part nobody else had figured out. Gods can be harmed. Gods can be weakened. Gods can be killed. The conditions are specific and the path is brutal, but it exists. Prometheus knew it because he's Titan adjacent and older than the current divine order, and honestly, I think he just finds Olympus annoying on a philosophical level. Hercules knew it because he'd spent 12 labors collecting the experiential data without realizing it. Together they built us a curriculum that Zeta Prime would never teach. We called it the Scar Track. Poetic, I know. The idea was that every cursed demigod carries the mark of a god's interference, a scar, literally or metaphysically. The The scar track was the methodology for converting that mark into power. Prometheus used himself as the proof of concept. What Olympus had intended as punishment, the chain, the eagle, the endless regeneration, he'd spent millennia learning to metabolize. Suffering as fuel. Constraint as a different kind of freedom. It sounds like the kind of thing someone says before they ask you to donate money, but he could demonstrate it empirically with his own biology, and that's a little harder to dismiss. I took to the scar track immediately. Maybe because I'd had a head start, 6 years of living with snakes for hair gives you a certain relationship with the thing that was done to you. My curse. Athena's and Poseidon's divine signatures in my system interact with each other, which apparently they didn't intend when they each separately decided to mark me. Athena's curse was the petrification, the gaze that turns to stone. Poseidon's was the water binding, the way any contact with divinely charged water, or any weapon carrying Poseidon's blessing, sends the curse flaring and turns me rigid and gray until the exposure stops. They both wanted to punish me, and they both did it without consulting each other, and the result is that I carry 2 divine marks that are constantly in tension. Prometheus thought that was hilarious, actually. Said it was the sloppiest divine spell work he'd seen in 3,000 years, and that I should consider it a personal compliment that they were both too emotional to coordinate properly. Then he explained what I could do with it. The principle is the same one Hercules used on his own divine tethering. The god's mark doesn't disappear. You can't remove a curse with mortal magic, not a divine grade one. But you can learn to sit inside it until you understand its structure. Until you find the load-bearing walls. Until you know which direction to push. The stone gaze is not a punishment if I can decide when it fires. The water binding is not a weakness if I can use it as a sensor, a warning system, a way to detect divine presence in the environment before anyone else does. I was getting there. I was genuinely getting there. And then Hercules betrayed us, and then the Genos fell in 11 days, and then Prometheus was taken. I want to talk about the moment it happened, because I was there. We were in the eastern cell, me, Prometheus, 4 others. We'd gotten word that the Athenian hero battalion was moving on the northern cells first, which gave us maybe 72 hours before they worked south. We were packing the research. Prometheus was calm, which I'd learned to distrust as a signal. He was always calmest when things were catastrophic, something about scale. He'd seen enough of history that truly bad news just settled into context for him. Then the door came in. Not broke open. Came in. One of the Hecuton took the entire wall section off its hinges from outside, and Karen walked through the gap in the brick like he'd been invited. The 4 others ran. I don't blame them for that. I made a decision not to run, which I also don't fully blame myself for, because Prometheus had already raised one hand and said quietly don't, and his tone said this moment has already been decided. Karen looked at him for a long moment. Then he states the terms assimilation, the 43 survivors, the mission to neutralize the remaining Genos cells. Delivered with the flatness of a man who has ferried the dead for so long that he cannot tell the difference between delivering news and delivering passengers. Prometheus just nodded. And then he turned to me. This is the part one need to tell correctly, because it's the whole reason I'm still functioning. He whispered quickly, quietly, with Karen 3 feet away. Medusa, he says, you know what I told Hercules, and he repeated to them. You know what my chains look like. You know how those chains work. And you know that chains can be redirected. That was it. That was all. Karen's guards moved in, and Prometheus went without resistance. I stood in the wreckage of the eastern cell, and I unfolded what he'd just said. I knew what he'd told Hercules. The methodology. The full kilogod map. Because he'd told all of us, that was the whole point of the scar track. What Hercules had given to Olympus was the knowledge that it was possible, the rough shape of how, and crucially, Prometheus's location. I knew what the chains looked like. Vulcan manufacture, divine-grade binding, the specific alloy that was the only material strong enough to hold a Titan-adjacent being. I knew this because Prometheus had shown us the schematics as part of our material education. Understand your enemy's infrastructure, he'd said. And I knew that chains can be redirected. Because that's the scar track principle, isn't it? The thing built to hold can be built to bind something else. Prometheus wasn't telling me to rescue him. He was telling me he'd thought further ahead than Hercules, further ahead than Olympus, and that the chains that were about to hold him were also, if I could get to him, the chains that could hold a god. So here's my list now, fully annotated. Poseidon. Athena. And in between those 2 names, a detour to wherever they've put Prometheus, a methodology for accumulating enough power to walk into divine territory and walk out again. And a chain that Hephaestus built that Hephaestus might not love being used against his own family. This is a long walk. I'm aware. But I'm the only one who knows the full route. They put us in one of their hero training compounds outside of Rekia. Of all places. I think there's something philosophically pointed about placing 43 god-touched survivors of a god-resistance network in the most geologically unstable island in the world, but maybe that's too generous an interpretation of Karen's sense of irony. The compound is functional. Gray, institutional, the kind of architecture that says we are not punishing you loudly, but is punishment quietly anyway. Our Zeta Prime credentials still technically apply. We can access the academic systems, we can practice, we can even teach in the junior wings if we want to demonstrate compliance. We just cannot leave without clearance. We cannot contact former network members. We cannot work on anything that could plausibly be described as anti-Olympian research. It would seem, the gods still wanted to get some use out of us whether we wanted them to or not. And we have to work alongside the heroes. That last one is the creative challenge. I should tell you about my friend Arachne. She was in the Genos before me, one of Prometheus's earliest recruits, back when the network was still small enough to fit in a farmhouse in rural Greece. Her situation and mine are not the same, but they rhyme in a way that makes our friendship make sense. Athena again. Athena seems to come up a lot when you're cataloging the specific ways Olympus decides mortal women are problems to be managed rather than people to be protected. Arachne was a weaver. Not just a talented one, a genuinely extraordinary one. Zeta Prime's records show that she had an affinity-level connection to pattern magic that comes along maybe twice a century. She'd been at the Athens campus, and she'd been insufficiently humble about her skill in front of the wrong faculty mentor, and Athena, who apparently has a deep and abiding need to be acknowledged as the original and best at everything she nominally governs, had cursed her. The curse is physical. Partial transformation, it doesn't happen on a schedule the way a werewolf's curse does in old stories, but it responds to stress, to anger, to the specific emotional register of feeling caged. Her hands go first. The fingers elongating, joints realigning, the fine dark hair that appears on the backs of her hands spreading up her forearms. If she's very agitated, it reaches her shoulders, her neck, the corners of her eyes going dark. She hides it with long sleeves and a particular skill at emotional regulation that I suspect she is much better at than I am. She is my only real friend in this compound. That's not a complaint, it's an observation. When your social options are either sycophantic, derriere gobbling heroes, or the broken god touched, you find your people quickly. We sit together in the East refectory every morning because the east side gets the light first, and if you're going to live inside a low-grade punishment, you might as well get the light. She drinks black tea and I drink whatever's on the table that didn't come from a divinely sourced water supply, which rules out about half the compound's beverage options because the plumbing here runs through stone laid with Poseidon's blessing for purity, and I have learned to check before I drink anything. We don't talk loudly about our actual plans, but we don't not talk about them either. We've reached a comfortable shorthand. She says things like, "How was your morning?" And I say, "Karen cleared me for the runic archives today." She wraps both hands around her mug, hiding the knuckles, and says, "How long do you think before the archives have what you need?" "That depends on what Prometheus left for me to find," I respond. Because I know he left something. That's not optimism, that's evidence. In 3 years of working with Prometheus, I never once caught him doing anything without contingencies. A man who has been punished by gods for longer than most civilizations have existed develops a thorough approach to planning for the worst case. The archives are the logical place. They're the one location in the compound that the heroes don't bother much. Most heroes are practitioners, not scholars. They accumulate power by action, not by reading. And that's a cultural attitude Olympus quietly encourages, because a hero class that reads extensively is a hero class that might start asking uncomfortable questions. So the archives are under-patrolled, and Prometheus would have known that when he built relationships with Zeta Prime institutions across Europe over the years. Quiet deposits. Encoded material. Things that look like academic donations and read like academic donations to anyone without the specific decryption key that he gave each of his senior Genos. I have my key. I've had it since my second year in the network. Now I just need to find what it opens. The compound has heroes in it. I should spend a moment on that reality because walking past them every day is a specific texture of experience that I want to be accurate about. They're not monsters. I want to say that because I think it's important not to simplify it. The Genos' failure was partly that some of us had simplified it, had turned the heroes into uncomplicated enemies, which made us sloppy in the 11 days because we kept being surprised that they were intelligent and adaptive and occasionally even had scruples about specific orders. People with scruples are unpredictable. Monsters aren't. The heroes are demigods who said yes. Most of them said yes because Olympus reached out at a moment when saying yes seemed like the only way to survive or protect someone they loved or escape a situation that had become untenable. The divine blessing wasn't presented as a leash. It was presented as a hand up. And by the time you understand the nature of the grip, you've completed enough missions that you're now implicated, and walking away becomes its own impossible calculus. I'm not forgiving any of them. I'm just being accurate. The one I have to be most careful around is a hero named Kephalos. He's third-generation divine blessing, grandfather was a sea-touched minor hero, father was a mid-rank air affinity, and Kephalos himself carries Aeolian wind magic at a level that puts him in the top tier of active practitioners in the compound. He's also perceptive in the specific way that well-trained practitioners are, where he picks up on things in the ambient magic of a room that most people would miss. He has been watching me since the first week. Not maliciously, I don't think. More the way a skilled practitioner watches anything that's technically interesting. My curse signature is unusual. 2 divine marks in documented conflict tends to generate a distinctive ambient reading, like a chord played in 2 incompatible keys at once. It's probably fascinating if you're into that sort of thing. I am increasingly less patient with being fascinating to people who work for the people who cursed me, but I'm managing it. I manage it by not looking at him directly, which is also just good practice given that my stone gaze isn't fully under my control yet, and I have no interest in turning a compound hero to stone because the administrative fallout would be spectacular. I find the archive deposit on day 19. It's not obvious. That's deliberate. Prometheus hid it in a Zeta Prime historical documentation series on pre-Olympic mythological taxonomy, which is exactly the kind of thing that sounds important and is never actually read. The deposit is encoded in the marginal annotations of Volume 12, which covers Titan-era binding methodology. My decryption key converts the margin notes from what reads as deteriorated Old Greek into something considerably more useful. I read it twice in the archive chair with my back to the door and my heart doing something uncomfortable behind my ribs. Here is what Prometheus left for me. First, a precise location. Not of himself. The location would be outdated by the time I reached it, but of the dungeon typology. The gods don't improvise when it comes to containing Titan-adjacent beings. They use the Tartarian sublevels, the ones beneath the primary mythological creature containment zones. And the specific cell configuration for a Titan-level prisoner follows a standard that hasn't changed in 3,000 years because Olympus doesn't update its infrastructure any more than it updates its ethics. The creatures in the sublevels above the cells are real and dangerous, and the notes include a bestiary with specific observations about their weaknesses. Second, the accumulation methodology. Fully written out. What I knew in outline form from the SCAR track curriculum, Prometheus had left in complete specifics, the feats required, the creature categories, the sequence. To reach the power threshold where a demigod can genuinely threaten a full god, you need to have performed a certain number of what the notes call threshold feats. Think of it like a lock with multiple tumblers. Each feat turns a tumbler, a genuine challenge against a lieutenant-level creature, not a scrimmage, not a training scenario, a real encounter with real consequences. And the final tumbler, the one that opens the whole mechanism, Titan's blood. Not symbolic. Actual. Prometheus is a Titan. His blood is available if I can reach him. Third, and this is the part that takes me a long breath to sit with, a note about Hercules. Short. No bitterness in the phrasing, which somehow makes it worse. It says, he chose a real ceiling over a theoretical sky. I understand the calculation. The methodology is complete without him. Continue. I fold the notation into my memory, replace the volume on the shelf, and walk back to the East refectory in time for afternoon tea. Arachne looks at my face and says nothing for a full minute. Then she says, you found it. I nod. Yes. She wraps both hands around her mug. The sleeves of her jacket are long today. She's been in a difficult emotional regulation stretch this week. The compound's newest hero assignment is a young woman blessed by Athena with pattern affinity magic, and Arachne has to watch her practice in the training courtyard every afternoon. I don't push on that. I understand what it costs. What do we need? She asks. I tell her, time, access, and eventually someone who understands Vulcan binding chains. She is quiet for a moment. Then she says, I know someone who might be that third thing. And I've been watching him for a week trying to decide if it was worth telling you. His name is Fornix, and he's the son of Hephaestus, and he's been at the Rekia compound for 6 days longer than we have, which means he was here before the Genos even arrived and nobody thought to tell us. He's not a hero. That's the first thing. He's not a Genos either. He wasn't in the network. He's something in between, which is the specific category of person the compound tends to collect, the ones who don't fit the binary. Nominally, he's here under an academic exchange clearance, technically affiliated with the Vulcan faculty of the Eden Zeta Prime campus. Practically here because the geothermal infrastructure under Rekia is the most interesting ongoing engineering project in the Northern Hemisphere, and he can't stay away from interesting engineering projects. He's a practitioner engineer, which is a discipline Zeta Prime treats as a minor specialty, and which is actually one of the most undervalued skill sets in the magical world. He doesn't just do magic, he builds things that do magic. Self-sustaining mechanism systems, enchanted structural engineering, devices that replicate magical effects without requiring a practitioner to continuously power them. Watching him work, I watch him for 2 days from across the compound before I let Arachne introduce us, is like watching someone argue with physics in a language it didn't know it spoke. And he's desperate in the way that sons of gods who want their father's attention are always desperate, which I recognize because the Genos had several and the pattern is consistent. Hephaestus, who apparently has enthusiastically acknowledged 2 other sons, Daedalus and Icarus, famous, celebrated, the mythology practically writes itself, has been considerably less enthusiastic about Fornix, who is by any technical measurement the most capable of the 3, and who has the misfortune of being capable in ways that are thorough and structural rather than brilliant and spectacular. Daedalus made wings. Fornix makes the thing that would keep the wings airworthy for a decade in any weather condition, and nobody writes poems about that. I find this familiar in a way I don't examine too closely. Arachne introduces us in the common workshop, which is the one room in the compound where Genos and heroes and others can coexist without it being a political statement because everyone's technically just there to practice. Fornix is reassembling something. I can't immediately identify what it is, which is unusual for me, and that alone makes me pay attention. It's mechanical, bronze-jointed, small, and it's doing something autonomous in the corner of the workbench while he adjusts calibrations on a separate component. He looks up when Arachne calls out his name. And then he sees me, and he goes very still for exactly 1 second, and then he smiles, the double-marked one. I've been hoping to meet you. I frown back. That's not a great opener. I'm sorry. He apologizes. I meant I've been curious about your curse signature since you arrived. I can read divine marks in metal tolerances. It's a byproduct of the engineering work, and yours is, he pauses. Structurally very interesting. I keep hearing that. I sigh resignedly. He perks up. I mean it as a compliment. 2 marks in conflict means 2 power sources in tension. You know what tension is useful for? Arachne, to her credit, does not say anything. She just watches. I throw out a guess, binding things. And he looks at me with genuine surprise, like he hadn't expected me to get there that fast, and then he smiles. And the smile is the tired, honest kind that I've only ever seen on people who've been working on something difficult and alone for a long time, and are suddenly in a room with someone who might understand it. I decide in that moment that we're going to be friends. I also decide in that moment that I'm going to feel terrible about what I'll eventually have to do in order to honor the thing Prometheus asked me to continue. But I am very good at deciding things in order, and that second decision belongs to later. We settle into a pattern over the following weeks that looks from the outside like the wholesome kind of cross-department collaboration that the compound administration is quietly pleased about. Fornix is developing a binding mechanism. He won't say what for, but I can tell from the alloy components and the theological resonance of the enchantment structure that it's meant to hold something divine grade. I don't ask. We're all keeping our specific agendas close for now. Arachne works in the adjacent space, her long sleeves and her tea and her careful, steady breathing, doing pattern work that she describes as personal practice and that I suspect is significantly more purposeful than that. Karen checks in with the Genos contingent every Thursday. It's the one interaction that reliably costs me something to get through without showing anything on my face. He stands in the briefing room with his ferryman's patience and his ancient head nodding at the progress reports, because we are now required to file progress reports, as if we are corporate employees. And he gives operational updates about the hero missions and where we are expected to provide support, and I take notes and say yes and file my own reports, which are technically accurate and strategically useless to anyone trying to understand what I'm actually doing. What I'm actually doing is working through the archive notes. The bestiary from Prometheus's deposit is detailed, and I'm cross-referencing it against the Zeta Prime academic databases, building a map of where the specific creature classifications I need are located in proximity to the Tartarian sublevel typology. Lieutenant-level creatures don't live in city centers. They're in the old places, the geologically active ones, the coastal cliff sites where the divine concentration in the landscape is high enough to sustain something that size. Rikia, as it turns out, is geologically active enough to qualify. I mention this to Fornix one evening, and he says, I've been monitoring the resonance readings under the lava fields for 3 months. There are at least 2 classification-eligible entities down there. He pauses with his calibration tool halfway through a motion to ask, why are you mapping creature locations? I have an answer ready for that question. I tell it to him, the same reason you're building divine-grade binding mechanisms. And he looks at me for a long moment, and then goes back to his calibration. After a beat, he says, Thursday night, the compound security rotation has a 40-minute gap in the eastern perimeter. I've been timing it for a week. Why? I ask. He tells me, because the geothermal readings are most stable Thursday nights, and I wanted to run a test. Now I think the gap might be useful for other reasons. Quietly he adds, I'm not going to ask you to explain yourself to me. Just, if you're going somewhere dangerous, tell me when. I've built things that might help. I tell Arachne that night. She's in the middle of a bad transformation stretch. It's late, she's tired. The emotional regulation that costs her nothing in the daytime costs her everything after 10 p.m., and her hands on the workbench surface are wrong. The fingers too long. The joints sitting at angles they shouldn't. She doesn't try to hide it from me. She stopped hiding it from me around week 3. She spares some concern for me even with all that. Do you trust him? I trust that his objectives and mine align enough to be useful to each other. That's different from trust, but close enough. I admit. She looks at her hands. The transformation, when it happens to her, is not grotesque. I want to say that clearly, because the narrative of her curse is usually told through the lens of the god who imposed it, which makes it monstrous. It's not. It's something that Athena did to a woman who is too good at something and not sufficiently deferential about it, and what it actually is, watching Arachne in these moments, is evidence of just how much power the curse is sitting on top of. The same principle Prometheus described. You can do a lot with power once you understand its power. She says, I want to come with you. I know, but not yet. I reply, if we both go and something goes wrong, the network has nothing. We are the network. She states. I look into her eyes. Exactly. She is quiet. Then she says, I hate this. I hate all of this. I hate that we're sitting in their compound filing their reports, and I hate that she gets to walk around out there free and blessed and teaching pattern magic to a student who doesn't know what that blessing costs someone, and I. She stops. Breathes. I watch the tension in her hands, whether it's going to crest or recede. It recedes. Slowly. You would come back, she decides. It's a declaration. On Thursday. I will do everything in my power to make sure of it, I assure her. There is nothing more to say. Thursday night. Fornix meets me at the eastern perimeter with a pack that turns out to contain a set of the most thoughtfully prepared field equipment I have ever seen, and I've been in field operations with the Genos for 3 years, so I have a baseline. Self-contained light sources that don't generate a divine readable signature. A ward array that fits in the palm that he's calibrated specifically to interact with my curse signature rather than work against it. He explains this quietly while we move along the perimeter gap. That he's been reading my ambient signature for weeks, and he built the ward to harmonize with both marks rather than trying to suppress either. So, the curse won't flare at contact with the ward itself. I look at him while he's explaining this. He's looking ahead at the terrain, and he's talking quickly the way he does when he's in engineer mode and thinks the explanation is important, and he doesn't notice that I've stopped walking for a second because I hardly understand him. I start walking again. I don't say anything. I file it away in the place where I keep the things that are going to be hard later. The eastern lava fields at night or something. The landscape is actively being made. That's the feeling, like you're standing on the workbench while someone's still at it. The geothermal readings Fornix has been monitoring translate in person to a specific warmth underfoot and a very particular quality of sound from the ground, something between a pulse and a groan. His devices tick softly in the pack. The first lieutenant-level creature is in a thermal vent depression about 2 kilometers east. According to Prometheus's notes, it is a Lamia-adjacent entity, 3rd classification, divine mark of Poseidon's deep domain. Aggressive, territorial, its primary attack mechanism is water-based, which means for me specifically it's both a danger and a signal. When the curse flares, I'll know the divine signature in its attacks is genuine. And if I can stay oriented while the flare is happening, I can start to read the structure. This is the theory. I've been working toward it for 3 years. I have never actually tested it in field conditions. Fornix, crouched beside me at the edge of the depression, says, "What are you feeling?" I reply, "The ward is working. The baseline curse is quiet." "You'll tell me if the flare starts?" he asks. I don't look his way when I say, "I'll tell you if I need extraction." "That's different, Medusa," he protests. I cut him off, Fornix. "I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing here." A pause. Before he agrees. "All right. I'll flank left and draw its attention on your signal." The thing about a curse flare is that it's not like pain. I want to be precise because the Zeta Prime medical literature is inaccurate on this point, possibly deliberately. They describe divine curse effects in terms borrowed from physical injury because that's the framework their curriculum provides. It is not accurate. A flare is more like your own nervous system suddenly deciding it's running different software. Nothing shuts off. Nothing stops being available to you. It's just all very loud, very immediate, and the translation between intention and action goes through several extra steps. The Lamia-adjacent entity's first attack is a waterspout, pure divine charged water, and it hits me in the left arm, and the flare hits me like a chord in the key I've been learning to recognize. I do not go rigid. That's new. I feel the rigidity trying to start, the stone propagating from the point of contact, and I do the thing Prometheus described in the notes, the thing I've been practicing in theory for months. I redirect it. Not outward through the gaze, not inward through the petrification. I push it down through my feet into the ground, which is lava rock, which is already half stone, and for a brilliant disorienting moment, I can feel the lava field through the soles of my boots like it's an extension of my own body. Then I look directly at the entity and I let the stone gaze fire. It's not perfect control. It's not even close to perfect control. But it's intentional. I chose when. The entity freezes mid-motion, partially petrified, and Fornix's flanking device fires on cue. He's built a containment mechanism that capitalizes on partial petrification, holds the creature stable so it can't regenerate or counter. We are very efficient. It is very unpleasant. But when it's done, I'm standing on the other side of it, and I've completed the first feat. The air feels different. I don't know how else to describe it. Prometheus's notes said it would, something about divine power having a physical presence in the atmosphere and a completed threshold feat being legible to that presence. Like the universe noticing you cleared a check. Fornix is at my shoulder. He gasps, "Are you alright?" I nod. I did that intentionally. He relates his surprise. I was watching. He pauses. That was the first time, wasn't it? I nodded again. He's quiet for a moment. Then he asks, "Did you push the divine energy into the ground?" He doesn't wait for me to answer before he goes on. You know what that means structurally. I start to raise my hand. I know what it means. He finishes anyway. It means you can route it. You can use it like a channel rather than a containment. You don't have to fight it, you have to. He gestures, frustrated with language, which is what he does when the engineering concept outpaces the vocabulary, redirect the load-bearing pathway. I don't really know what he means, but I smile at him. Yes, that's what Prometheus said. A pause. Prometheus told you this. I start to head back. He told me a lot of things. I'll explain more later. We go back through the perimeter gap before the security rotation closes. Arachne is awake in the east refectory, both hands on her mug, and she looks at my face. You actually did it. You redirected it. I say yes. It worked. She smiles, then we're moving. The weeks after that have a different quality to them. It's still the compound, still the gray institutional walls, still Thursday progress reports filed to Karen, still Kefalos watching me from across the training yard with that professionally curious expression. But something has shifted in the architecture of how I'm moving through the days. Before, surviving the compound. After, using the compound. The runic archives yield more of what Prometheus hid. The deposits are distributed across multiple volumes. There are 7 in total, each covering a different aspect of the methodology. I collect them over 3 weeks, careful not to pull from the same section twice in close succession, careful to check out adjacent volumes as cover material so the reading pattern looks like unfocused scholarly browsing rather than targeted retrieval. What I compile is this. The threshold feats required number is 5. Lieutenant-level entities, divine-marked, each carrying the signature of a different Olympian so that the accumulation is cross-divine rather than specialized. I've done one. For Remain. The bestiary gives me geographic locations and approach strategies for each. 2 are accessible within a reasonable covert operational radius of the compound. 2 will require actual travel, which means I need to build a cover that allows me to be out of the compound for long enough without triggering an escalated response from Karen. The 5th feat, Prometheus left this note last, after the methodology sequence, as though he wanted to make sure I'd finished the rest before I got to it. The 5th feat is Prometheus himself. What he means, I think, is that freeing him is the 5th threshold. A Titan-adjacent being held by divine-grade chains in a Tartarian sublevel bestiarium is a feat by any reasonable classification. And freeing him gets me to the Titan's blood. No other Titan would part with their blood willingly. He planned this. Of course he planned this. The man has had millennia. I tell Fornix about the chain specification. Not everything, not the blood, not the full endgame, but enough for him to understand what I need. He listens with the focused quiet that he brings to complex engineering problems, and when I finish, he says, I know that alloy. You just so happen to know how to decode divinely crafted chains? I ask. He doesn't mind my tone. My father builds with it. It's a proprietary Vulcan formulation, the only one that has sufficient tensile strength for divine-level application. He pauses. I've been trying to access the formulation for 2 years. Not for he stops. Not for what you might think. I have my own project. What is the project? I ask now. He says, I'll tell you when I'm sure it's viable. We look at each other across his workbench. His bronze-jointed autonomous device ticks in the corner. The compound is quiet outside, Thursday night, the security rotation mid-gap. He speaks plainly, you're trying to get to Prometheus. I say, yes. He's intrigued, and then what? I answer him, and then the people who should be afraid of me will be afraid of me. A very long pause. He says, I want to help. I need you to understand that I mean that without any agenda about what happens afterward. Okay, I had hoped he'd say that. He looks at me. Do you actually want me to, or are you saying that because it's easier? I pause. I think about the thing I filed in the hard later place. I say, I know. And I'm sorry in advance for anything that asks more of you than I have the right to ask. He looks at me strangely. Then he says, that's a very specific thing to apologize for in advance. I shrug, I'm a specific person. He almost smiles. Then he goes back to his calibrations. The second feat is a sea serpent variant in the coastal cliffs south of the city. Poseidon marked, obviously, which means the flare is going to be significant. I go alone because the coastal approach is narrow enough that a second person would be a liability rather than a support. Fornix gives me 3 devices anyway. The Harmonized Ward Array, a depth reader that can track divine water concentration so I can anticipate the flare before the attack lands, and something small and bronze that he just calls the Anchor, which he explains will stabilize the ground routing pathway I found during the first feat. I ask him how he knows the ground routing pathway will be available again. He says, because you're the load-bearing structure now, not the curse. The pathway is yours. It was always yours. The curse just built on top of something that was already there. I think about this for most of the coastal approach. The sea serpent variant is larger than the notes described. This is not alarming. Prometheus always said his field observations were conservative estimates because he learned over centuries that overconfidence is more dangerous than overpreparation. What is alarming is the way it moves, which is less like a serpent and more like water itself deciding to have a shape temporarily. It flows around obstacles. It changes depth instantaneously. And when it first hits the water spray from its own movement against the cliff face, the flare comes and it comes hard. I breathe into it. This is what Prometheus's practice looked like from the outside when he was training us, just breathing, just sitting inside the thing that was trying to kill you or contain you or reroute your experience of existing, and breathing, and finding the edges. The stone propagates from the spray contact, and I push it down through the anchor device into the cliff rock, and I feel the cliff, briefly, vast and old and unimpressed with the weather, and from inside, that steadiness, I look at the serpent. I don't petrify it immediately. I watch it. I let the stone gaze run at low intensity, enough to slow it, enough to make its movements legible to me, and then I read the Poseidon signature in its divine mark like Fornix reads engineering tolerances. I read it until I understand its structure. Until I find the load-bearing walls. It takes too long. There's a moment where the cliff edge is very close and the serpent's movement brings its full weight against me, and I genuinely think this is it. This is the moment. This is where this ends. But I find the wall. I push. And the stone gaze fires clean and intentional and full, and the feat is done. 2. I sit on the cliff for quite a while afterward. The sun is doing something useful on the water. The serpents in my hair are very still, which is their equivalent of impressed or possibly just unsettled. They've been with me for 6 years, and I still don't know exactly what they experience, but they're responsive to the curse dynamics in a way that functions as a warning system when I pay attention. I take the anchor device out of my pocket and look at it. Small bronze mechanism, the joint's the same style as everything Fornix builds. I think about the fact that he calibrated it specifically to my curse signature without my asking him to. I put it back in my pocket and walk back to the compound. Arachne has found something. She tells me that night, flat and careful, the way she delivers information she's had to metabolize before sharing. She's been running pattern magic analysis on the hero compound security infrastructure. This is theoretically her academic practice, pattern magic being her affinity. And the ward systems of a divine-affiliated compound are dense enough to constitute interesting professional study, and she's found something in the underlying structure that isn't security infrastructure. It's a suppression array, distributed across the compound's foundation, designed to operate on divine curse signatures specifically, keeping them at a low simmer, reducing the flare frequency and intensity in affected individuals. Why would the compound suppress curse flares? I reason, that seems like it would be useful for Karen. It is useful for Karen. It keeps us manageable. But that's not the only function, she pauses. It also keeps us dependent. Because the array is doing the suppression work that we should be learning to do ourselves. Every day we're in here, the suppression array is doing the thing that the scar track was supposed to teach us to do ourselves. It's keeping us just stable enough to be useful and making sure we never fully master the curse. I sit with this. I say, they built a system that simulates the progress without allowing the actual progress. Yes, it's elegant. I hate that it's elegant. She says, how long have we been in here? I mutter aloud. She responds anyway, 7 weeks. How much control have we lost? She pauses. Then she says, not much. You've been doing field work. The field exposure breaks the suppression because outside the compound the array doesn't reach. Every time you've gone out and worked with the curse in real conditions, you've made genuine progress. But the others, she stops. Well, the others haven't been doing field work. The others. 38 Genos beyond me and Arachne, in this compound, filing progress reports and attending briefings and practicing in the training yard, while the suppression array keeps them just stable enough to never build the thing they'd need to leave. Arachne, I whisper, we can't tell them yet. If we tell them and they act on it, Karen will know we found the array. I know. She speaks. A long quiet. And then she says, I want to burn this place down so badly. I turn away, I know. I do too. She doesn't need to see the tears in my eyes. She looks at her hands. The knuckles are starting. She breathes. I hear the tears in her voice when she says, go to your feats. Get to Prometheus. And then we burn it. The third feat is the one Fornix comes with me for. Not because I asked. I'd planned to go alone, same as the second. But he appears at the eastern perimeter Thursday night with his pack and a set of devices I haven't seen before and the expression of someone who has decided something and is done discussing whether they've decided it. I didn't invite you. I tell him. He scoffs, shocker. I'm coming anyway. I start a reprimand, Fornix. He moves on like he doesn't hear me. The third entity on your list is a Typhon derivative. Third classification upward. I've been reading the geothermal signatures, and I know where it's nested, and I know what it does to the local electromagnetic field when it's agitated. You need someone who can read those outputs in real time while you're managing the flare. I'm that person. He pauses. Also, I've built something for this specific situation, and I want to see if it works. I raise an eyebrow. You built something for a situation you weren't supposed to know about. I built something for the situation your ambitions were clearly leading toward. I've been watching you for 7 weeks. I'm an engineer. Pattern recognition is the job. He doesn't back down. I look at him. He looks back. Not combatively. Just steadily. The way he looks at his calibrations when he's made a decision about the tolerance and he's done second-guessing it. I choose my battles. If something goes wrong tonight, you go back. You don't try to help me, you go back. That's not an agreement I can make. He says. I open my mouth to speak. He says, come on. The security gap closes in 30 minutes. The Typhon derivative is inland, in a thermal vent field that Fornix has been mapping for months. It's larger than the sea serpent, less mobile, but the divine mark on it is complex, multiple Olympian signatures layered, which Prometheus's notes say happens to entities that have been in divine proximity for long enough to accumulate residual blessing from ambient sources. It reads as Zeus adjacent at the primary layer, which is a new one for me. The flare when it comes is different from the Poseidon mark flares. It's not water. It's charge, electrical, divine-sourced, the kind of thing that the Zeus faculty at Zeta Prime teaches in third-year advanced elemental theory. It hits the curse system at a frequency I haven't navigated before, and for a very bad moment, I can't find the routing pathway at all. Fornix is at my back saying, it spiked at 47 Hz equivalent when you made contact. Your routing pathway opens at 42. You need to lower the frequency of the intake. Breathe slower. I breathe slower. It's an absurd instruction in context. I do it anyway. The pathway opens. I route. I push the charge down through the ground, which convulses slightly because the Typhon derivative is doing something to the lava field beneath us, and the stone gaze fires and fires and fires in deliberate controlled pulses rather than the full lock I'd used before. And each pulse petrifies a section, and the entity comes apart in sections, and the feat is done. 3. Fornix is still at my back. His device is recording something, the electromagnetic outputs, probably. I'm breathing. He whispers 42 Hz. I'll recalibrate the anchor for that baseline frequency. It'll make the routing faster next time. I tell him, you don't have to keep doing this. He says, I want to. He pauses. I'm aware that I want to. I'm not confused about what that means. I stare at him, enough for him to explain further. I know. I know there's something you're not telling me. I know the endgame you're building toward is bigger than what you've described. I'm not asking you to tell me yet. I'm just here. While it matters. I turn around. He's looking at me with the honest, tired expression that I noticed the first day, the one that belongs to people who have been working alone on something important for too long. I divert the subject, your project. The one you won't tell me about. He speaks on it, it's a chain. A binding mechanism. Vulcan alloy, divine grade. I've been working on it for 2 years. I think I finally have the formulation right. The question leaves my lips before I know it. Who is it for? A long pause. I don't know yet. I built it because I could. Because the methodology exists and no one was doing it and problems that aren't being solved bother me. He pauses again. Who is it for on your end? I shake my head, multiple options. I'll tell you more when we're closer. He nods. We go back through the perimeter gap. The fourth feat is the one that nearly ends it. I go to a Seacliff site 300 kilometers north. We arrange travel clearance through the academic exchange protocol Fornix is nominally on, which gives him legitimate grounds to request a field survey trip that I can attach to as a research support affiliate. Karen approves it with the disinterested efficiency of a man who has been told to keep the Genos productive and isn't looking too closely at the specifics. The fourth entity is a Silivariant. Sea-based, multi-limbed, Poseidon and Athena marks both, which means when the flare comes it's going to be both divine signatures at once and both pathways are going to want to compete for routing priority. I've been preparing for this for 2 weeks. Fornix has rebuilt the anchor twice, each time more precisely calibrated to the dual signature profile. Arachne has been working on a supplementary ward array using pattern magic that she describes as a routing scaffold. It doesn't do the routing for me, but it gives the pathways more structural definition so I can distinguish between them more easily when they're both active simultaneously. The flare when it comes is the most complex thing I've ever navigated. Both marks. Full intensity. The stone gaze and the water binding both firing at once, which means my body is trying to do two contradictory things with the same divine charge, and the routing pathways are not distinguishable from inside the flare. They're a single noise, and I cannot find the walls. I cannot find the load-bearing structures. I cannot breathe slowly enough or redirect fast enough or... Fornix yells something I can't hear, and then I feel the anchor device activate without my contact, which means he's activated it remotely, which means he built a remote activation into it without telling me, which should feel like a boundary violation and instead feels like exactly what I need because the scaffold comes up through the soles of my boots and the cliff rock and it's vast and old and the noise separates into 2 channels and I find both walls at once. I push both. And both pathways route simultaneously, down through the lava rock, down through the cliff, and when I look at the Scylla variant my gaze carries both marks and what leaves my eyes is not petrification in the traditional sense, but something new. A localized divine domain negation, the 2 marks canceling each other's sustaining frequency in the entity's divine mark, and the entity doesn't petrify. It dissolves. I stand on the cliff. The sea is doing something loud below me. I feel like I've been turned inside out and put back, but the architecture is the same, just clarified. The walls I found are load-bearing, but they're not the whole structure. There's more structure. There has always been more structure. Fornix is beside me. I can tell by his silence what he's just seen. He says, "You dissolved a divine mark." That's not in any Zeta Prime curriculum. Now why exactly would anyone want that to be in any curriculum? My head hurts, but I still mock him. "Medusa, what are you?" he asks. Very, very angry. I answer. The tears come, and I can't stop them. I'm someone who was given something terrible by people who thought it would only be terrible. And I would like to return the favor. He's quiet for a long time. The sea. The cliff. The anchor device warm in my boot from the activation. He says, "Tell me the rest." I need to know the rest. So, I tell him. The full methodology. The 5 feats, the Titan's blood, the chain, the endgame. All of it except one piece I keep, because there are things I haven't decided yet, and the deciding requires getting close enough to the situation to see it clearly. He listens without interrupting. When I finish, he's very still. Then he says, the binding chain. The Vulcan alloy formulation. Do you need to use it on a god? More than one, possibly. I agree. And I've spent 2 years building the mechanism to do exactly that. He laughs. It's a short, disbelieving sound. Do you know how many times my father has told me that my projects are impractical? That Daedalus made things that mattered and I make things that over-engineer solutions to problems that don't exist. I say, this problem exists. Yes, he says yes, it does. He looks at the sea. I think he might be doing something with his face that he doesn't want me to see. Then he says, I want to help you get to Prometheus. I want to use my chains. He stops. He says, I want this to matter. It does. It will. I mean that. I mean it entirely, and I file it next to the other thing in the hard later place, because meaning things genuinely and doing things that hurt people who mean things to you are not mutually exclusive. Prometheus taught me that too, by example. The 5th feat is not a creature. We get Fornix's travel clearance extended under the pretense of a multi-site survey. Arachne, who has by now demonstrated enough academic productivity to be cleared for field research of her own, comes with us. The 3 of us in a vehicle on a road that is eventually not a road, and then not even a path, the geothermal landscape doing its geological work around us. The dungeon typology Prometheus described is real, and I find the entrance exactly where his notes indicated, a lava tube entrance disguised under a ward so old that the academic dating system Fornix applies to it comes back as pre-Olympic. Older than the current divine order. Built by Titans for Titans, repurposed by Olympus without being fully understood, which is a metaphor for several other things in my experience. The sub-level creatures are real, and they're worse than the bestiary described, because of course they are. Prometheus's field observations are conservative estimates. There's a Cerberus type at the first junction, 3-headed, obviously, divine marked with Hades' signature, which is cold and dark and nothing like the electric or fluid marks I've been working with, and the flare it produces is new again. But I've dissolved a divine mark on a cliff in northern Iceland. I'm not where I was. The routing is faster now. The 2 marks in me have stopped competing and started collaborating, which is something I did not expect and which Prometheus, I think, did. I redirect the Hades cold into the rock floor and the stone gaze fires clean and we move through. Arachne handles the mid-level with pattern magic. I've never seen her use it full intensity, and full intensity is something to see. The transformation is happening, her hands are wrong, her arms are wrong, the dark spreading up to her shoulders, and she is not managing it, she's using it. Channeling the physical change into the pattern magic output, so the web she lays in the corridor is divine signature reactive, and the creatures that come through it are stopped so completely that we don't have to spend time or energy on them. She's been practicing in the compound at night. She's been practicing for months. I did not know she was this far along. I should have known. I should have been paying more attention. Fornix moves through the physical obstacles with the quiet competency of someone who has spent years engineering around physical constraints and knows that most physical constraints are just mechanical problems with solutions. His devices do specific and beautiful work. I make a note to tell him so later. The Prometheus cell is at the bottom. He is exactly where his notes said he would be. The chains are exactly as he described. And when he looks up at me in the dim divine-sourced light of the cell, his expression is the same warm, unreasonable patience he brought to every planning meeting in every Genos safe house across 6 continents. You took longer than my most optimistic projection. If you wanted a quicker pickup, you could have given me a more specific address. I quit back. He smirks. What's the fun in that? He looks around at Fornix and Arachne. I see you brought the right people. Fornix built the replacement chains. I tell him. Prometheus looks deeply at Fornix for a long time. Fornix stands up straight under his gaze, the way people do when someone genuinely sees their work. Prometheus says, your work is way better than the wings, you know. Significantly. The wings were brilliant, but impractical. What you've built is permanent. Fornix smiles, then deflates. Somehow my father prefers the impractical. Your father has a complicated relationship with what he's built. Prometheus lets him know, it'll clarify soon. He looks back at me. Are you ready? The blood. You understand the quantity. I don't hesitate. Yes. He extends his arm. The chain around his wrist allows it just enough range. The blood is gold and warm, tight and warm, and when it meets my palm it doesn't burn. It settles. Like something recognizing something. It goes through me like a key through a lock that has been waiting for it. The 5th feet is not a creature. The 5th feet is this moment, standing in front of a titan, in a cell at the bottom of a divine dungeon, receiving the strain of divinity that connects all things, humans, gods, demigods, and Genos. The divine link to the first primordial, converting what was given as punishment into what was always actually power. The divine marks in me don't disappear. They compound and vibrate at intense resonances. The system expands. When it all calms down to a controlled thrum, I can feel both marks clearly now, and the Titan's blood between them, and the routing pathways as clearly as I can feel the floor under my feet. Are you ready to go? I ask him. A silly question to ask someone that has been chained up for years. Prometheus is too jovial about it. I've been ready for quite some time, yes. Fornix unlocks the chains. They go into his pack, the Vulcan alloy, 2,000 years of divine engineering, which is now also the thing we're going to use to finish this. We walk out. It takes another month before we can move on Aphrodite. I want to be accurate about the timeline because the month matters. It's not planning time, or not only planning time. It's the time it takes for the 3 of us plus Prometheus, who cannot re-enter the world openly because Olympus will move on him immediately, to coordinate a chain of events that relies on pieces placed across multiple locations and divine domains, and which requires Fornix's mechanisms to be calibrated for a divine target rather than a creature-class target, which is a materially different engineering challenge. Fornix works on this with the focused, sleep-depriving intensity that he brings to the problems that actually matter to him. He barely eats. Arachne starts leaving food on his workbench without comment. I notice this and catalog it as information about who we've become to each other over these months, which is not something I can afford to examine too closely right now. The approach to Aphrodite is not direct. Direct doesn't work with gods. They have too many escape vectors, too much advance warning built into the divine network. What works is what the Genos always used when the network was operational, misdirection and structure. You don't go to where the god is. You create conditions under which the god comes to where you need them to be. Fornix is the one who suggests the lever. His father. He suggests it quietly, one evening, without looking up from his calibrations. Aphrodite is afraid of my father. Not exactly afraid, she'd never admit fear, but she's cautious about the work he's capable of. She knows what he can build. If she thought he was threatening to expose something she wants hidden, he pauses. She'd come to negotiate. What's the fear about? I ask. He turns to us with a sigh. It has to do with their arrangement with Ares. The duration, the specifics. My father has the contract seals. He has the documentation. It's the kind of thing that Olympus pretends doesn't exist. Prometheus asks him, can you get your father to call her in? A long pause. I can try. I can go to him. This might be the kind of thing where being his son is finally useful for something. The way he says this is so careful and so old that I have to look at my workbench surface rather than at him. He notes the uncomfortable silence and says, "Let me try." He goes to Hephaestus alone. He comes back in 3 days looking like the trip cost him significantly, but with a confirmation, his father will cooperate. The specific motivations for Hephaestus's cooperation are his own, and I don't ask, and Fornix doesn't explain, and all three of us understand that we are now in an arrangement with Fornix's father who has his own agenda that we haven't fully mapped. Aphrodite walks into the location Hephaestus nominally controls, a forgeworks complex in the Aegean, divine infrastructure, old Olympian real estate, because she believes she's meeting only Hephaestus for a private negotiation. She does not believe she is walking into a mechanism that Fornix has been building toward for 2 years. She is very beautiful and very old and very dangerous, and for exactly 4 seconds, she seems to understand that something is wrong before Fornix's chains activate. They work. Of course they work. He built them. She is bound, divine-grade Vulcan alloy, the mechanism holding her stable and present and unable to invoke divine escape protocols. She is basically a human. She is furious. She says things I won't repeat. She looks at Hephaestus with an expression that contains multiple centuries of complicated history. Hephaestus looks at her with the expression of a god who has finally gotten what he's wanted and who intends to make a very specific use of it. And I understand in that moment, with absolute clarity, what his intended use is. This is the piece I kept from Fornix. This is the thing I hadn't decided yet because I needed to see it clearly. I've seen it clearly. Aphrodite did things. I'm not arguing her out of consequences. I'm not making a case for her. What she is, as a divine force, as an Olympian, as a participant in the architecture of power that destroyed the souls that became the Genos. The group that cursed me and cursed Arachne and has been doing these things to women and cursed ones since before Zeta Prime had a name for magic. I know what she is. I'm not confused about it. But I also know what Hephaestus intends. I know because I now recognize that look in his eyes in a heartbeat, and it's the same look that has been haunting my dreams ever since Poseidon made me the subject of his attention. Hephaestus's behavior patterns with captured things are not abstract. They are documented. And the documentation uses the same language as what happened in Athena's temple at 19, and I am not leaving a woman any woman, regardless of what she is, in a position I know that language describes. Fornix is watching his mechanism work. He's checking calibrations, making real-time adjustments, the precise focused attention he gives to everything he builds. He is not watching his father. I look at Fornix. I look at his father. I look at Aphrodite. I've been wrong before about not being able to make a decision until I see something clearly. I'm not wrong now. I move to the control mechanism. Fornix looks up in surprise. I'm not supposed to be near the controls. That's his position. He's the engineer. He says, "Medusa, what are?" I reroute the chain mechanism. The Vulcan alloy carries divine charge, and the routing pathway in me is clear and clean, and the Titan's blood has been in my system for a month, and I understand divine structures in a way I could not have articulated a year ago. What I do to Aphrodite is quick and it is final, and it is an act of mercy in the only sense that mercy can function in a situation this old and this broken, which is that I end it before the alternative can begin. Then I step back. Hephaestus goes very still. Then he goes very loud. Fornix looks at what I've done. He looks at his father. He looks at the chains, which are now only restraining nothing. He looks at me horrified. I start to step towards him. I can't bear that look on his face. Fornix, I know what I've done to your relationship with your father. I know what this moment cost. I did it anyway. I'm not going to apologize for what I did, but I'm asking you to understand why. He is very quiet. His father is not quiet. His father is a god and a smith and a maker of things that bind, and he is furious in the way that gods are furious, which is architectural, which changes the temperature of the air. Fornix stands between me and his father. I didn't ask him to do that. I don't think he decided to do it consciously. He's just standing where he's standing. Hephaestus says something that I'm not going to repeat because it was not said to me and the fury in it belongs to him. Fornix turns to me with another one of his inventions in his hands, and we are both transported somewhere outside the hero compound. It's quiet between us, both of us thinking out our thoughts. My mind is racing. I have just defied a god. Hephaestus is left somewhere at his forge with the kind of anger their priests like to call righteous. We all know he hasn't, he'll be back, the ledger isn't closed. But he's not here right now. Fornix turns around to me. His face is very carefully arranged. We need to go. He says, we're not done. I don't have the words to say anything yet. The wound feels too new, too fresh. I know why you did it. He adds, I'm not saying I'm okay yet. I'm saying we're not done and I still want to finish it. He picks up his pack. Poseidon is easier to access than Aphrodite was and significantly harder to neutralize because his domain is water and water is everywhere. And he can be everywhere water is, which in a world that is 70% ocean, gives him remarkable tactical flexibility. The solution is Fornix's engineering, which at this point I have stopped being surprised by. The deep, the abyssal domain of Poseidon, the divine infrastructure that sustains his power base, runs on thermodynamic principles that are divine in source, but mechanical in operation. This is the thing that Prometheus's notes flagged as a structural weakness, and that Fornix has been quietly analyzing since I told him the full endgame. Divine domains, unlike divine beings, are not infinitely adaptable. They have physical properties. And physical properties have failure modes. Water heats. At sufficient temperature, even divine domain water changes state. And a god whose divine domain has changed state is a god who has lost the structural framework that sustains their power. What Fornix builds is not a weapon exactly. It's an infrastructure intervention. A series of geothermal amplification devices installed at the abyssal boundary points of Poseidon's domain, the points where the divine water infrastructure interfaces with the actual geological thermal vents that exist in the deep. The devices interface with the vents. They amplify. They route the geothermal output into the divine water table. We place them over 3 weeks, using Prometheus's mapping of divine domain infrastructure, using Fornix's engineering precision, using Arachne's pattern magic to mask the device's signatures from divine detection. It is the most methodical thing I have ever been part of. It is, in a strange way, Prometheus's final lesson, not the blood, not the power, but the patient architecture of consequence. The thing you build that does the work, so you don't have to be in the room when it finishes. Poseidon is in his domain when the devices activate. I know this because the divine watermark in my system, the one that has been a warning signal since month 2 of the scar track, simply stops. The signal goes quiet. Not suppressed. Gone. I stand in the compound when it happens, in the east refectory, with morning light coming through the windows. Arachne is across from me. We both know when it happens. She says nothing. She wraps both hands around her mug. The knuckles are starting today, but she doesn't hide them. In our shorthand is say 1. She raises her cup in a barely perceptible toast and takes a sip. What follows is not the story I expected. Or maybe it is, in the way that the stories you've been told are never quite the shape of the thing when you're inside it. Prometheus broke it all down. Poseidon is trapped in Olympus with the divine boundary failing, because that's what happens when a domain collapses. The divine energy is retroactively claimed and restored by the primary source in Olympus. The problem is Zeus, who has his own consolidation instincts, begins a chain of Olympian internal dynamics that the gods had apparently not stress-tested. Zeus is not designed for threats and practices no restraint in beefing up his security after seeing the collapse of a divine peer. He drains more divine energy to make himself stronger. It's what he does. It's what he's always done. Apparently, Olympus is not safe for the Olympians. Rather than stay on the mount and get drained, Athena and Aphrodite. And here I want to be precise about the sequence of events, because Aphrodite did die, but her divine essence is not a simple thing, and what happens to the essence of a goddess I ended is not the same as what happens to a mortal. Both manifest into the mortal world at reduced capacity. Olympus under Zeus's current state is not a place a goddess with any self-preservation instinct remains. They're born to a mortal mother, twins, half-strength, the divine capacity present, but not Olympian scale. This is not the outcome I planned. This is the outcome the structure produced. I find this appropriate. Athena will be easier to find and end. Hephaestus is angry. He is working. I can feel the geothermal outputs shift when he's in a forge session, which is its own kind of divine signature now that I know how to read thermal patterns. His anger at me has the consistency of something he's decided to hold rather than express, which means it's structural and it will last. Fornix will have to live with that. Fornix is in his workshop. I know this without going to verify it. He's always in the workshop. Arachne is in the field. She left 2 days after Poseidon went quiet, clearance filed through the academic channel as a research expedition. And the compound administration approved it because Karen is dealing with the Olympian internal situation and is not looking closely at anything that looks like quiet compliance. Arachne is not on a research expedition. She is doing what she told me she was going to do, ending, methodically, every hero who carries an Athena blessing, one by one, so that when we come for Athena, she has no heroes left to give her back the power she needs to return to what she was. I didn't tell her to do that. I also didn't tell her not to. And Hera is somewhere in the mortal world, which Prometheus mentioned before we brought him out of the dungeon into the kind of provisional safety that's available in the current situation. He said it almost as an afterthought, the way he delivers important information, as, "You should know there's a child." Hera's. The fatherhood is Zeus's and the fear is Zeus's, and that's what matters. He's been afraid of this prophecy for as long as the prophecy has existed. The son will end the father, like the father ended his. Tell us. The ending son. He'll be born soon. Prometheus can tell in the way that Titan-adjacent beings can tell things about the shape of time. Prometheus doesn't dwell on it. It's not an ending. It's a transition. One the Olympians have been evading for quite some time. I guess these things always feel the same from the inside. Arachne and I watch this with perplexity. So, what do we do now? You know what you do now. You've known since the archive. I figured out. The compound. The 38. Yes. And the many other transitionary agents out there. That compound is a good enough place as any to start a new base. Don't you think? The suppression array is still running. 38 Genos in a compound built to keep them just stable enough to never fully master their own curse. Built to simulate progress while preventing it. A system that looks like rehabilitation and functions as a leash. I know how to dismantle it. Arachne mapped it. Fornix can build the dismantling mechanism. Prometheus can stay out of reach long enough for us to do it without divine intervention from the remaining Olympian power structure. The compound walls are gray. The East Refectory still gets the morning light first. Karen is somewhere in a briefing room, delivering updates to a hero class that is one by one losing its Athena blessings to a woman who moves through the world with long sleeves and very quiet footsteps and no interest in being thanked for it. And I am 25 years old, and I have 2 gods on my list, and now both names are crossed off, and the list is the same piece of paper it always was, and I'm standing here looking at it. I fold it. I go to Fornix's workshop. I knock. He says come in, and he doesn't look up from his calibrations. I walk in. I need one more mechanism. What for? He asks. Suppression array dismantling. Compound foundation. There is no need to hide from him anymore. I have the schematics. How long do you need it to work? Long enough to teach 38 people to find their own routing pathways through the curses that have been placed on them. He's quiet for a moment. That's not a set timeline. I say, no, it'll be different for each of them. He already working it out. I'll need to build it to self-sustain until complete then. He starts doing something with his hands, the engineering calculation visible in the gesture. 3 months. Maybe 4. I nod. I sit on the workbench edge. The bronze-jointed autonomous device ticks in the corner. It's the same one that was there the first day. It is still doing something I can't identify. I've stopped trying to identify it and started finding it comforting. I finally say it, Fornix, I'm sorry. I mean it. He stops. I know you do. He pauses. I'm not done being not okay yet. But I understand it. He looks up. You didn't want to leave her in a position you'd been in. Yes. He squints. I think he pauses. I think my father is a worse god for Aphrodite than I wanted to know, and I think I was choosing not to know it, and you didn't allow me to keep choosing that, and I'm angry about it. He pauses. And also you were right. I finally breathe, letting go of a breath I didn't even know I was holding. He nudges me playfully, don't make that face. I'm not making a face. I say, you're making the face you make when you're trying not to seem right. He clarifies. I don't have a face like that. I object. You have exactly that face. He insists. You've had it since the first feed adventure. I sit with this for a moment, quietly sitting amongst his clanging mechanism and scribbling calculations. Sitting here with him has its own calming lull to it. When I no longer feel the emotions overwhelm me, I force my weary limbs to move. Build me the mechanism. He waves his hand towards the door. I'm already working on it. The morning light comes through the workshop window. The device ticks. Outside, somewhere in the world, a child is about to be born. A goddess is trying to find her footing at half strength. And 38 people in a gray compound are one mechanism away from discovering how to use the curses that were supposed to break them to rise instead. That was never their whole story. Prometheus set all of this in motion. I'll keep it spinning. Obviously.